What I will say about the installation of QMM, it's better if you install the components, let the installer put in the Atom and set up the SQL and all of that, instead of trying to do things where you put in the Atom first and then try to run the installer and just say bypass that, so the Express where it doesn't install any of the components for you. So that's just the bottom thing. It tends to work better if you let it install as many components that it can install. There's a few other prerequisites that you'll have to have on the system, but just let it install as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what does this tool do exactly? It migrates from one on-prem directory to another on-prem directory, or we can also go to the cloud. We can go to Azure. So you can go on-prem to the cloud, but you can't go from tenant to tenant, or the source, at least for mail enabled stuff, you can't have a source hybrid environment. Okay, we've run into some trouble where people tried to do this, and then there was the whole question of whether or not it was supported, and it's not, and it was a huge problem. So if somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm trying to move or migrate users out of a hybrid Exchange environment, and then they might get into trouble with that, you won't be able to support it. Okay, so that's just something we'll talk about right out of the gate on that. So what we're just going to do is I'm going to generally run through these menus here, then we'll go through, talk about what this is, and then we'll just do a migration. We'll just step through and configure a migration session and show you how it works. Okay, so just out of the gate, this is where you're going to come a lot of the time to get the information about how the project is set up. You'll need this for various things that will become clear shortly. All right, so just open the project. And this is going to tell you, the first step is, this is the Atom project. So this is where we store absolutely everything about the AD migration. And it's a directory itself. It's like Active Directory, but it's the pared down version of it. It's a lightweight directory services application. Okay, so it has its own database, just like Active Directory. So we just feed all the information that we're moving and taking from the source AD, we put it in there and copy it to the target, or merge into existing things on the target. All right, so this is, they're saying, where do you want to put your AD-LDS, your lightweight directory service, right? Typically, it's on the same box as this, the Migration Manager console itself, but it can be anywhere, really. You can put that out, you can separate it out. Migration Manager is very compartmentalized. You know, things can be separated out to as many servers as you want and all that. So it's good that way. All right. The standard port is 389. If there was another directory service on this box, it will choose another port. But 389 is a standard. Okay. If there's a pre-existing Atom, it's going to ask you, it's going to find it on that machine, and then it'll ask you. So you can see here where it's populated for me because it recognizes there's already one installed and it finds it. And you can choose the project that you want. In other words, what's the name of your database? Otherwise, it's just the QMM AD project. That's the default name for your directory, and it's stored on this computer. Okay, and I just called one under my own. So I'll just leave it as that. Otherwise, create a new project and then move on. So that's your directory. That's it. Like I said, everything is stored in there, okay? Nothing to do with mail will go in there. There's nothing goes in there. Everything to do with mail migration is going to be stored in the SQL Server, okay? So they're separate that way. Even though these two products have to, like if you're going to do a mail migration, you have to have the AD side of things. You can't do it without it. They're relying on each other, but they're still compartmentalized and exclusive, basically. Okay. So this is the name of the account you're going to use to access that very AD-LDS project database. So just fill that in, whatever that's going to be.
Any special permissions on that account?
Special permissions? No, because this is when you're installing, you're going to install typically under your the service account is a full administrator, and you should leave it as such. So whatever you're going to operate the console as, that's what should go in here. You know what I mean? Your service account that you you log in with and you install the product with is what you should use here. That's the quickest way to no problems. So this is the part for SQL, for the Exchange side of things. And so you can see just a SQL Server, where is it located? You can use any not third party, but any other SQL Server version, I should say. And we will install, like I said, that's another component that the MSI will install is the SQL Express. It will install SQL Express, and you can use Windows authentication on it or SQL Server authentication. Are you familiar with SQL Server?
Yes.
Okay, so you understand the difference between these two. You
Yes.
can use either or. Yeah. Okay.
Do we support SQL Server Express on production machines?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, people usually install, if it's a smaller migration, they'll put it on, right on this box with their migration manager, which should be a dedicated host anyway, typically. So most people put it on there. But I think most people actually use, enterprise, or they use something larger to do their migrations for them.
Just to have that out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, because there's only one connection to it. That's the whole problem. It's limited to one connection. So, or very limited. It used to be one connection. Don't hold me to that. They may have changed it. But anyway, it's very limited. But it works. You can use it.
Okay.
Yep. Use existing data. So again, this is just choose the database. So that's it. This is the complete section for SQL Server. So if you want to know something about like where it's located, because a lot of time they'll have lots of SQL Server and they won't know where something is. They won't know where the Atom project is. They won't know where the SQL Server is. So going to Open Project shows you where these things are. So that's why you'll want to come in here sometimes when you're troubleshooting. This is the statistics portal, which is you can use it, but it's very dated, very old. For the most part, just skip it. I never configure it. I always tell them to skip it. It kind of works and kind of doesn't. If the migration was really clean and simple, then the numbers come out right. But if they start doing a lot of resyncs and a lot of messing around, then those statistics can start to get really iffy. So just skip this. Tell them it's obsolete, essentially.
May I have a question? I read that this statistic portal doesn't contain live data or live statistics, that the statistics are being, let's say, synchronized after some period of time. So it's based on any task, or how often is the statistic portal synchronized, or people don't use that, so no one knows when it's going to be updated?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. There's no thing that you can go and say, okay, relaunch it or run on the statistics now. There's nothing like that. It runs behind the scenes. It's a web interface. You're looking at it, and yeah, it'll update when it updates. I don't even know how often that script. We never use it. Even back in the day when it was supposed to be used, we kind of avoided it, just because of the weird numbers it was showing, and devs would never fix it, and so on and so forth. So it's never been a good thing. We look to our log, the DSA.log file. That's what we look to for everything. You can extend the log there, and we try to extrapolate all information from that. The other way of gathering, I guess, statistics in a way is not really statistics. I wouldn't say that, but in your migration sessions, if they're running their migration sessions accurately and describing, there's a section to put the information in there, and you can always see which users were migrated and all of that within the migration session itself. So largely that's where it comes from. The other thing is, we tell you when there's an error with something, there's going to be a view log at the end of every migration session that says exactly what went right and what went wrong, more importantly. So you kind of know that, okay, your session is okay, and that's really how you have to go about auditing what went down. The portal, just skip the portal. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so again, this is just the end of the project. These things were set up beforehand, and it basically just gives you a rundown of what it was, and that's it. Finish, boom, goes in. It's rechecking stuff, and the project is basically configured from that standpoint. This will show up appropriately when it is. Okay, view. These menus, they're not very helpful. These ones here, there's not much in there. Or refresh and navigate. I never use them. Delegate, you may use that if you want to assign someone. You might go on this level for migration sessions or something. I think you can go here. even if right click, action, whoops, oh, it changed. So if you want to give somebody action, delegate at that level, you know, for this domain pair, you might say give someone the permissions that's in another department. You know, they're going to have access over just this domain pair. You might not want to give them the rights over the other domain pairs. So here's where you would delegate that. Tools. Yeah, so tools, okay, so you can right click on this and create the domain pair, or you can just do it from here. You know how menus typically have the repeated commands just under the menu system. New delegated migration, so that's it. Export to, this is when you start to get into the resource processing, and we'll talk about that later on our next session. Yeah, I'm not even going to talk about it here. Agent manager, this is the one other thing you're going to need to do migrations, and it is, we call it the agent manager, and it consists of 5 services and a log agent service as well. So let's say there's 6 services that run all together, and we can go and look at that. Services, because this can be, you can have as many, whoops, MSC, you can have as many DSAs that you want. And it's very important to have maybe a couple too, so that when one fails or breaks and the production is down, it's nice to be able to move to an alternate quickly and get back up and running. Okay, so it starts with Q as quest. So there they are. We got an activation service, AD proxy, a configurator, controller, and a link resolving service, and then the logging service, which is filling the DSA log, and the possibly the link resolver log. Or no, that's probably created through here, sir. But this is the regular DSA log that it's writing. Okay, so you don't control these. Note that only 2 of them are running at this time, and that is normal. The activation, the controller, and the link resolving service will all start when they're needed, on and off, but these 2 will stay running. But it confuses a lot of people. They come in here, they start trying to control these things manually, and they're turning off and they think they're broken, and all kinds of bad things start to happen when they manually manipulate services. So just tell them they don't need to do that. Everything is controlled through here. You're either turning this sync on or off here, or in a migration session, it turns on the services and uses them as it needs it. You never have to go to services unless there's a problem you're trying to figure out. You know, services should not be touched. Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, you just create your domain pairs, right? New source and target domain pair. Here's where you go. You're going to pick out your source domain, and you're just going to put the domain in there, domain or the domain controller name, and then put your credentials in, and this will run a check. As soon as you put those creds in and you go next to get to the target side, it will run a check. That's how you can be sure that the credentials have access to your domain controller. It'll fail and tell you. Okay, and it'll do that for both. It'll run, then, you know, just finish it out, and you're left with your domain pair, source to target. So mine's Bilbo SRC, which is source, to Bilbo, my target. Okay. All right, so some of the trickier parts is to understand the differences between the sync and the migration. What the migration sessions do, this is where we sell our licenses. Our licenses for user objects only. Everything else is free. Computer objects, groups, any other objects in Active Directory you can migrate for free. User objects are the only one that require a license. People are supposed to buy their migration licenses, but it is in fact possible to migrate users with the synchronization without ever having bought licenses. Okay, there are some reasons for that we'll get into a little deeper later, but the main one is because a lot of the time people just need to match users from source to target in order to make mail syncs work. So they buy all their mail licenses, right, and they're accurate, and their users already exist in the target side. So that's an ideal situation where you say, well, we got to know, we still have to have a match from source to target so we know where to migrate mail, but you're really not, you don't need to pay us to migrate users because your users are already there on the target side. Okay, so that's a situation where you don't need licenses. You would just say, okay, you just want to match from source to target so that your mail sync works. Okay, but anybody who's creating or merging into users should be buying licenses and using migration sessions. Migration sessions have different powers. In some cases, it's much more powerful than the sync but the sync also does different things, which I'll explain now. So the migration sessions are a one-shot deal. When you configure a migration session, it starts up the services, it migrates those users, OU structure, or whatever you've told it to migrate to the target, and that's it. It shuts down. It's no longer doing anything. There's no cache or anything. It's not watching the source any longer. Okay, it's one-shot deal. Delta syncs are what the synchronization will handle. Okay, so migration session gets your objects over, then you'll move to configure the sync, and that will start to watch what's going on in the source and moves over any changes that are happening after the fact. So by default, the synchronization is always running. It starts up every 15 minutes, takes a look at the source, says, okay, it looks at USN numbers, user sequence numbers. It says, did anything change on any of these objects that we previously migrated? If they did, then it will move those changes across to the target. Okay. All right, so let's just walk through a migration session, and we'll talk a bit about the power it has over the synchronization, how it's different. All right, so you'll just flash up new migration session. I'm just going to call this test user migration. Okay, and here's where you should probably be talking about what, this is training, but they should put in whatever they want, right? That describes accurately what they're doing here, like it's particular OU they're migrating or whatever it is. That helps them understand, because a lot of the time when you come back to wanting to reclaim licenses or undo a migration, if you have a lot of migration sessions, it can be confusing, and this information might be very helpful. Most people, they don't fill it out. They go by the name they're putting on it as a way to remember it. But whenever you get the chance to encourage them to do this. All right, so we named it and gave it a comment, and now we're just going to select objects. We're going to do a couple of different migration sessions here. I'll just go through the basics first here. So this one is the select button. This takes me to the source domain controller on the source side. Okay, so I'm just going to say, all right, I just want to look in here. So I'll just highlight that instead of expanding it, and I say I get these users in here that I created, and I'm just going to take one or two. You can do it by selecting by group membership too. It'll also pick up the users out of it and then populate into your screen. When you see this gray like this, it means you've taken a subset of what's below. If it was like that, see how it's got them all? And if I put that on there, so it's getting all the, so just the clear blue check mark means you've gotten everything underneath. But if I wanted to take a subset of what's underneath, I'll just highlight that again to get it back. Then I'm gonna clear all those because I just want the subset. So yeah, so there's options there that that aren't obvious when you look at it, that will signal what you selected. Okay, so there, I've got 2 users in there. That's it. I'm taking those 2 users from the source, and I'm either copying them to the target, unless it finds the matches based on SAM account name in the target. If it finds that exact SAM account name, and I've configured this to merge into those users, then it's going to do that very thing. All right, so now I'm going to browse to the target, right? And this is my target side. Where do I want to put those users? So I'm going to say I'm just going to dump them in my users OU, but you can put them wherever you want, right? Currently, it only lets you select the OU where you want them to go, right? It's not going to show you anything more than that because there's no need to. So there we go. I'm just going to put them back into Bilbo users. Now there's nothing in this directory over there to my knowledge yet. All right. So this is asking you, and this is some of the power it has over synchronization. Synchronization, ideally, all your objects have already been migrated, and now this is saying, okay, which OUs should I be looking for? And you want to have in scope, right, to take over, so on and so forth. So this is OU hierarchy migration. So this is asking me, I chose those from the Bilbo users OU, and this is saying, do you want to migrate that OU itself with the users you selected with inside it, or do you just want to take a flat list? In other words, just take the users. So I'm going to say, yeah, just take the users. I don't want to recreate that OU on the other side. Okay. So that's all that is. And when merging with existing accounts, what do you want to do? Do you want to merge into the object wherever it's found? So if it's found in some other OU, do I just leave it there and merge into it? Or do I merge into it and then bring it into the OU I've just selected here? So I found that under users. Do I want to move it into Bilbo users? Merge and leave the account where it was before the migration, or merge and move the objects to the new OU. I had that backwards there. So the top one means move it into there. This one says just leave it wherever you see it in the target Active Directory, just leave it where it is. Okay, so that way, you don't interfere with policies and things that might be applied to OUs. And never merge. Skip accounts that match any accounts on the target, so it just won't. So that's a good way of preventing any accidents that you don't want to happen, So you may be saying, yeah, if they pre-exist, don't touch them, don't mess with them until, I can configure it properly to do that. So I'm just going to say that. That's the settings for that on the target side. This gets a little more, we'll just talk about this security descriptor. These are basically the ACLs that are in the source security descriptor. Do you want to replace it on the target, or do you want to merge it? So that gives you those options of what to do with those ACLs as security descriptor. SID history, you can add SID history. I'm sure you're well familiar with that, and that gives you access to resources back on the source if you do that. We install a little agent for this that must go onto the domain controller, which means you run into all kinds of security headaches with antivirus and things like Carbon Black and Cisco AMP and any other kind of intrusion detection or antivirus or whatever the case may be for security. There's even more than that, and these agents will fail to either install at all, or they'll fail to operate once they're installed. At some point, one of these security services will stop it in its tracks. And that's when we have to get after them to uninstall it and put the exclusions in. And depending on which security service we're talking about, sometimes it might have to be completely uninstalled because they're so anti-hack and hard to deal with that it seems to take a complete uninstallation to get it to work. But that's what you'll see a lot of, is that SID history agent. And the other little agent we put on is the password agent. Okay. Now, we do have, whenever you run into a lot of trouble having these little agents installed, and you'll see it right in the log, it'll just say fail to operate or fail to launch the SID history agent or the password agent. You'll see it. We have pre-installed resolution for that now. So you can pre-install the agents, and that gets around a lot of problems. You don't need the same level of God rights to work with pre-installed agents, and it's been quite successful. So you'll wind up doing that quite a bit, offering that up, and that's in the manual as to how to do it. You'll run a couple of scripts on the Active Directory to make it work, and I think one on the console here as well. But it's straightforward. It's PowerShell scripts. You just run them, and away you go. It works well after that. Add source members to the corresponding target groups. This is something rarely used, but people often check it on because they misunderstand what it means. So again, this is like taking a source user and putting it into a target group. Even though you've already migrated the user from the source to the target, so the user from the source became a target user, right? But this will also bring over any source members and put it in the group. So now you've got both target user, the matching target user, and then you've got the matching source user. So they're both in there, if that makes sense.
Which is usually the case.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, it'll copy it, but all you're going to see is a SID. You won't know what it is because you can't resolve it. So it'll work without the trust, but you just won't know what it is, and it'll sometimes be confusing. So you will see that whenever you see a SID, it's because it couldn't resolve it. Mm-hmm. So this is what it's basically. So you got source domain, target domain, and say you got a group here, and you migrate that group to the target. And a normal migration just says, okay, I also want to migrate the user that's in it, and that'll come over as target user, right? So you'll see that in that target user, source domain, and the regular groups. But if I say migrate source users, then I'm going to actually bring the source domain user, and it's going to look like this in the target. Now you've got source and target users over there, and most people don't want that. It makes a mess. Why would you want this most of the time? You're typically moving away from source environments, right? They're going to have a good reason that they want their users, their source users, to start accessing resources in the target for some reason. It's not impossible, or but it's very, very, very rare. I mean, I can't even remember somebody actually wanting this or using it, to be honest. I mean, I've seen them turn it on and I've explained to them that they probably don't want it, and they usually agree. Okay, so it's rare. User principal handling. You can either copy it from the source, skip it from the source, or set it to another one, an alternative that's on the target. This, when you hit this radio button, this reaches out to the target AD and grabs a list of whatever's already there, because you may want to have a different logon for users based on resource forces or whatever the case may be for logons. So yeah, this is coming from the target. Okay, I'll just copy it over so it's the same as from the source for now. Password handling, you have all sorts of options here. Copy it, skip it, you know, set password to username with, so you can add stuff, things like that. You set that, configure it. Okay, I want a prefix or a suffix added to the passwords for whatever reason. This is all configuration that they'll come up with. We really don't care, for lack of a better word, what it's about. You know, this is for them. Most of our problems just stem from the fact that the agent is not working as a result of security. Okay. So then we get into here. This here has the ability to control the MS Master Account SID, MS Exchange Master Account SID. And that identifies the Master Account SID is basically, it's the same value as the SID history, or not SID history, but the SID object, SID value. And it's just controlling and stamping into, so let's say if I enable, or let me just back up here. If I leave this like this, default, I'm not disabling the source accounts and I'm not enabling the target account. So we create the target account as disabled automatically. And what that says is our source user is now getting the MS Exchange Master Account SID stamped on the target. The target user, so when you create a mailbox, our source user actually is the owner of it. You can't have two users. You can't have a target user and a source user, both owners of a mailbox. It doesn't work. It's not supported. Microsoft won't support it, so on and so forth. We control where that MS Exchange account is getting stamped based on these two settings. So this setting says, okay, my source account's enabled, my target account's disabled. That means my source account is going to be the owner of the target mailbox. If I reverse these and disable my source and enable my target, then my target SID is going to get stamped on the source side, MS Exchange Master Account SID. That's confusing, but you can go back to this video and you know, understand what I said. If you select both, so you've you've enabled the target account and left the source enabled, nothing gets copied because now you've got two owners and it didn't understand what you were trying to do. But it should be one or the other. Sometimes you'll want to leave it or enable it on the target. That's fine. It's a completely valid situation. It's just that master account SID is not going to be the owner of the mailbox, and then you'll get logon problems if you're trying to operate thinking that it was. Okay. So again, this is the mail migration portion, or if for some reason you just have a need to activate the accounts in the target for regular reasons. Just know that this has Exchange ramifications behind the scenes. Intra-forest migration options. If it's an intra-forest, you just reconnect the mailbox. The mailbox is basically in the same environment, so you just say, you know what, just reconnect it. That'll change the LEDN to point to the proper place. And I believe that's basically it of what that's changing. I don't think it changes much more than that. Okay, so it's easy peasy. The Exchange mailbox will be accessible right away. Use a custom add-in. This is the
If I may ask, and
Yeah.
sorry for the interruption, if you click on enable target accounts, and does it not let you disable the source account or some way prevent you from doing the wrong thing?
No.
Okay.
No, just in that, just know that if you want the source account to be the owner of the mailbox, it's not going to be.
Okay.
It means that if you enable a target account, the target is now the owner of it. So that just messes up with if you're trying to log on from the source using that account to that mailbox, it's going to fail because it's going to say, well, you're not the owner of this mailbox, so I can't let you log on, things like that.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, this is the attributes section. Attributes on any of the objects you're migrating. So you have classes in Active Directory, user classes, group classes, computer class, contact class. Here's the classes here. You can see all the way down, group class, inet.org, person class, printer, queue, organizational unit, all these classes. And then you get to user, typically the most important one. And everything you see in here is what we migrate. So sometimes people might ask, well, do you migrate this particular attribute? Here's where you're going to come in and look. And you're going to want to turn on this. If you can't find it here in the base set, then you'll turn on this. And this is going to show a whole raft more of things that we put over. Go all the way down to the user class, typically, if that's the one you're after. And you're going to look through all these to find it. Okay? So don't forget about that checkbox, because sometimes you come in here, you forget about that, and you say, oh, it's not here. And in fact, it is. Anything grayed out like this, you can't skip it. You can't skip it because the migration won't work when you do. So that's why we've graded out. And there's a few objects like that. Your stamping attributes will be like that, so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm just going to come back out here. So that's attributes. Lots of time people have a million reasons for skipping attributes. A very well-used section and button. Sometimes they don't. They just leave it. They want everything. That's fine as well. This says custom add-in. Say you want to do something really fancy to those attributes on their way over. You need to change something in a really difficult way. This is, we have a couple of custom add-ins that support will give out, but we do not manipulate these scripts in any way. They have to either do it themselves or they have to get custom development to help them. Billable service, obviously. So that's what we tell them, if you want a custom add-in to do something. But when you're troubleshooting, you really want to keep an eye on this, because this can really change how things are working. If they're manipulating various attributes and you're trying to solve something around those attributes, then obviously you need to pay close attention to what they're doing. And if you think it's related in any way, shape, or form, you have to say your professional services guy or your consultant has to come in here. They're the ones who built this. They know how it works and what you're trying to do. We don't change things in their environments whatsoever, so that we are not liable for those changes. We typically don't take control with GoToMeeting or WebEx or whatever either. Sometimes we do. If it's extremely painful and we need to, we'll do that. But typically, we're not going to come in here and configure anything or change anything. Okay, so that's it. And then boom, you're basically done. Don't use this test mode because reclaiming licenses can be hard sometimes. It gets into this weird thing. So you just get people to test on dummy accounts instead of, production users. Like some people want to test on their production users and stuff, but we just say, look, you need a lab. You should have a lab that's set up very similar to production as possible and test on that. Or otherwise, create those dummy accounts and you can test in production, I guess. Okay. And once you get past here, then the next step is, do you want to start migrating? So I'll just say yes. And it will come to here and it'll just run through these 4 processes. Initializing, it's reaching out to the source Active Directory and enumerating the entire Active Directory. It has to look through the whole thing to create a picture of what it's trying to find and make sure it can find the things that have been selected and so on and so forth. Just the way it has to work. So it can take quite a while sometimes. I've seen this probably, some people said, obviously I didn't wait around to see, but they said it's taken hours to initialize. In a small Active Directory environment, you should be looking at a minute, 2 minutes maybe is a typical. So 2 failed objects. So selected objects 2, migrated objects 2, but failed objects 2. So what this means is if it migrated the objects, then it wrote those attributes, probably most of my attributes over, and it migrated, creating or merging those users over there. But we got 2 failed portions of it. So here's where you're going to get your, not statistics, but you're going to get your rundown of what went bad with your migration session. Second screen, there we go. So you hit it again and it comes up. Failed objects. There we go. Okay. Cannot set password user. Okay. Password, you're going to see this constantly. It just means that the password policies are not matched from source to target. And we'll talk about that. The knowledge base has good articles on this. Passwords have to match, right? If they're trying to overwrite a password in the source and it has a password age thing on there, then obviously it's not going to update the password if that password doesn't fall within the parameters of what's been set. If that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? So you understand password policies?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right,
this is probably history, a password history issue, not a password length issue, because we're passing the hash and not the password itself. That's one thing I've noticed.
right. Yeah. Yeah, so that's an important point. We just pass the hash. We really don't do much other things. Anything we can extrapolate from a hash, then we know. Because in other words, Active Directory is saying, no, you can't change the password yet because it's not time. It's not, you haven't used this one long enough. That's something that's extrapolated, not from the hash necessarily, but just the regular policies. Okay. You just have to bring those policies into alignment and the passwords will sync up. But other than that, the user's created just fine on the target. I don't think I even need to show it. It says it here. They will be there. Okay. And just finish. All right, synchronization. Once you have all your migration sessions done in the most ideal fashion, like I said, these things can be done in different orders. Synchronization first, migration second, migration first, synchronization second. That's possible, but it's not the ideal way to go about it. Migration session should be done first and then synchronization. The difference between the synchronization, the most important is it builds a cache. Okay, so it builds up that cache during its initial synchronization. The initial synchronization after you select your scope of users that you want in that synchronization scope is built. And then this is the start and resync. So this start and resync means it's the initialization of it. It's a full resync, and that's when it builds that cache that I'm speaking of. Okay. After that, it moves into what's called delta syncs. This will gray out, and now start and stops will be available only. So that means that it's running based on the cache it's already built, and it's looking for changes every 15 minutes by default in the source, and will migrate those changes of anything that's in scope. Okay, so it's a coexistence tool, keeping the source Active Directory in check with the target Active Directory at all times. All right, so the properties is where you're going to configure that. So let's just say I wanted to add what I have in here for users, those two users only. How would I go about just selecting that? So I have to select my OU, say, right? It doesn't expand it anymore because it's based on an OU level. And then you move to filters when you want to get anything else that might be underneath of there that you don't want. So let's just say I only want the class of user. I'm going to turn everything else off. So it's anything, if it finds a computer object in that OU or any of these other classes in there, it's going to ignore it. The second option, this helps me select users that I want to exclude. So I'm just going to go in there, going to highlight that, and say, yeah, I'm going to turn all that off, because the only ones that I want are the two I migrated, which I believe were this one and this one. So now I'm going to, I got this back. Select those you want to exclude. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight them all, and I'm going to exclude the two. So that means these two will go, but everything else will not. Okay. So there we go. That's an exclude list now. It's going to ignore everything else in there. And advanced, if I were to write an LDAP expression, like an extension attribute that was on, this attribute exists on my users, extension attribute 12, and I set that to sync me. Then this is going to add to that LDAP query that the tool uses against the Active Directory. And it's only going to find those users that have extension attribute 12 with sync me written in the value of the field. So you manually go in there and manipulate your users to have that value, sync me. Okay, and that gets added. So if I say that, I go like that, then you can see it got appended into this LDAP expression. And you can grab that entire expression by going like that. See how it ran it all the way out to the end? So you can do that. And then I can see it. If I wanted to see it in Notepad, then there it is. That's the full expression. It's saying, okay, take anything with this attribute set to sync me. It's a user object, and not, there should be, not
Vertical bar is not?
The exclamation is a not.
Oh.
But it's a little confusing why that user is there. But anyway, it will take the user and ignore everything else. And this, yeah, blah, blah, blah. This is stuff we don't really care about. But this is basically what it's going to do. It's just going to find the ones that say that, and away it goes. Only two it's going to sync. That's how you can accurately control exactly what's getting synced, because it won't really matter what's written in or dropped into these OUs on the source. So if somebody created a new user in there, it's not going to matter. The tool is just going to ignore it because it doesn't have the sync me written to it. Okay, so that's how you can get super control on what's going across and what isn't. This is an option that says, okay, do not create anything over there, only merge. So maybe you did all your migrations earlier with the migration sessions. Now you say, don't create anything new. I only want to match up to the ones that I've already put across. So that's what that's for. If you do want it to create, then you'll switch it up here and you'll set the OU or where they're going to go. So you can keep track of what's being created when they come across and not all over. Unless they are merging into something, then you might have to be careful where they went. Okay, so that's another tricky side of it. Yeah, and this is basically the same settings again. Do you want the passwords? Do you want the SID history, UPN, what to do with it? So the synchronization has a lot of overlapping functionality, but there are differences. Okay, again, this is target scope now, very important. This is how you set up a two-way sync. When we select this scope, it says the job direction. Well, when I hit finish, this will say, if I only select a scope here, this will change from source to target. That's what 99% of people want. They do not want a two-way synchronization. What people tend to do is they think they have to set this target scope in order to make the migration work. They do not. This should remain blank most of the time. You have to have a very good reason for wanting the two-way synchronization. Maybe you want passwords to run in both directions. That's a good reason for a two-way synchronization. Calendar syncs are a good reason for two-way synchronizations, things of that nature. But most of the time, people do not require it. Okay, so leave this blank. Target scope should be blank unless they are very clear on why. Advanced, again, you can use a custom add-in and attributes to skip. And this is the other difference over migration sessions. Migration sessions do not migrate any mail attributes whatsoever. They just don't do it unless you use a custom add-in to get it done. But the synchronization handles all mail attributes and mail enabling of accounts. So when you migrate your accounts, lots of times people will come in and say, I can't get my mail attributes across, and they're using migration session. That's the reason why. They have to come in and set their users into the scope of this synchronization, and it will mail enable those users. And they can do that based on, or set it to different things. Mail enabled users means it doesn't have a mailbox, but it's a mail user in their environment. Mail enabled users for native move, or mailbox enabled users, which means the user actually has a mailbox. When you do that, you also have to set up our redirection templates. This should never be anything that could accidentally become a real address over there. So in other words, we're going to append the name, their name, to the front of @ and we just typically go, if it's target, you can just say target.local, target.local, and source.local. This is the safest thing because these are not real. We stamp these into the proxy addresses that allow us to, get mail to accept into the mailboxes. Redirect into them. Okay, so that's what they should be. Don't use the actual domain names of the accounts and things of that nature. Just don't do that. I don't know why that they don't actually just hard code this, but they don't. Specify, so merge objects for corresponding contacts. So you may have in your target domain, you may have had a contact set up for somebody in the source, but that is going away now because you're migrating the source user. So if that's the case, you're going to say, okay, you know what, just consume that contact now. So we grab out the proxy addresses that might be on that contact and we roll them into the user object that we create on the target. Okay, so it's just a one-step process. That way it makes everyone's life easier by not having to deal with contacts and conflicts and things of that nature that might be over there on the target. This is going to be, when you're doing a synchronization, this is the mailbox that you want it to default into. Okay, you can actually change this in the mail side of things. Like you can set a default mailbox here, and then you can set another mailbox on your collections, your mail collections, and we'll talk about that later. But this is just the default database of where it's going to go. This is in the target, this is in the source. And a lot of time you're going to set the second one. If you're doing a calendar, two-way calendar sync, if you're trying to do that, then you were going to set up these both, your defaults. A lot of time you can get around not setting this bottom one at all, but that's a bit more complicated, so we won't worry about that now. I mean, you can set them. It's not going to hurt anything if you set them both, so maybe just setting them both to defaults is fine. Okay, and that's basically it. You say okay. In this case, let's just see current mailbox. Oh, my Exchange servers may not be on, so yeah, so I won't see that now. Okay, but I say okay, and then that's my configuration. Boom. And then I just say, okay, start and resync based on that configuration. That will build the cache. Then it'll go to sleep. The agent will drop into a sleeping status here, and it's watching for changes on the source every 15 minutes. How do I know that? Because up here is my agent manager. The agent manager is the DSA. That's what it is. Tools, agent manager here. This is the DSA, and the DSA is those 6 services. This is where I look to control and change my credentials for it. So it's installed on this same migration manager server that I have here. I can uninstall it. I can change the credentials to read into the Atom. I call it Atom. That was the old name for it. It's AD-LDS is a new name for it. But anyway, slice it. It's the same thing. This is where you change credentials to read into it. A lot of the time you'll have to come in here because somebody will change their password and then it'll break their access into this. So they need to change it here. Okay, so the properties. This is very important. You'll use this a lot to solve problems. In here, we're going to say, where do you want, which domain controller do you want to speak to? Which global catalog do you want to speak to? This is where we're going to set these 2 things. And a lot of time when you get into trouble, like you're having some really stubborn issues with things, you'll want to change. Every once in a while, you'll want to change the domain controller to an alternate. And it will get by some stubborn problems sometimes, especially if they can't reboot those domain controllers, which is very, very often. They're not going to reboot them in the middle of the day. If you suspect there's something going on with them, they'll have to put in a change request, so on and so forth. So just being able to come in here and reset these is very, very helpful to alternates. And this is for my, or that's for my source, and this is for my target. And obviously they'll recognize their own source and target domains. So you'll set that there. Okay, so that's a good thing. Oh, and sorry, I almost forgot. The reason I came in here to begin with was how did I know it's a 15-minute schedule? Because it says so right here, and you can change it. Sleep duration between interval sessions. So the agent, the DSA, wakes up, looks at the source, goes back to sleep for 15 minutes, then wakes up again, so on and so forth. And this says how often do I want that happen, or which days and nights and all of that do I want to cover. Now this is solid blue, so it means just run continuously, no blackout periods. But sometimes if you have heavy traffic, or the synchronization slowing anything down, you may want to say, okay, I don't want to synchronize Monday to Friday or something, but I never see anybody really set this, narrow it down. Okay. Any questions?
I found information about adding new agents from Migration Manager. So you can deploy the new agent directly from the Agent Manager.
It doesn't work. No, not really. What it'll do is, what I do is just copy the DSA.msi to the machine you want and install it. And then when you go in here to add a machine, so say agents, you're going to add a machine, put the NetBIOS name of that machine in there, and it'll immediately detect it and say, okay, and log it here.
Okay.
Yeah, this will, when you say I want to install service, so when you add something here, it will start the RDP session for you to log in. Okay. But it seems to be easier just to copy the DSA. I don't think it's going to copy it over. Okay. All right. Yeah, so that's that. Okay, so that's basically the difference between migrations and synchronization. Migration has the power to copy structure, OU structure, Active Directory structure over. It has the ability to use different things like things known as import file, which help with mass migration and stuff. So there's a couple of things that have power over synchronization, and they're different. The synchronization runs deltas. It keeps a cache. It's watching the source all the time, and it handles mail enabling, whereas the migration sessions do not. Okay, so those are, I would say, the 2 or 3 really major differences between migration session and synchronizations. Synchronizations don't require licenses per se, but migration sessions do, and that's how we make our money with MMED. Yeah. Okay. All right. So once you migrate those users, you have to have that record, right? We have now our database of it. Okay. And that's where everything else stems from it. Both the mail migration stems off of those records, and everything to do with resource processing. And we're not doing resource processing till tomorrow. So we'll just leave that for now, but just know that those records are vitally important to everything. And we'll get into a lot of that. Okay, so what time do we start? Do you have any questions at this point?
To know, so something is not working. So what kind of logs you are searching? What kind of log you are looking at, and or
100%. Okay, the DSA log is the main log. That's the main log that basically houses everything that's going on with the 6 services, right? All those services are all writing into DSA. It's all in one shot. There are a couple of other logs that are much less important. Okay, so yeah, so DSA covers everything, and the only other one that you might be concerned with typically is the link resolver log, but you won't look at that very often because all it's really denoting is I am resolving my group memberships and writing to this log. So if there's 5 users in a group, right, and it's on the target and it's trying to resolve those memberships, i.e. link resolve, then you might run into a problem where it says, oh, I can't find this user or whatever, and so I'm going to log this warning or error that it's not there, sort of thing. So it's a much more simplistic log. DSA covers all the heavy lifting for it. Okay, so where is that stored? You just go to the installation directory here, under C, program files x86, Quest Software, Migration Manager. And there's the DSA. And remember, this can be installed on any other server, any other computer, anywhere. You can have, many DSAs. And the best practice while we're talking about this is that each domain pair you create, each Bilbo source to Bilbo, like here, should have its own DSA. So if there's multiple 10 domain pairs, 10 DSAs would be ideal. That way, if something goes wrong and you have to reinstall or take down a DSA, you're not stopping all those other domain pairs. Not only that, the logs are going to generate mass amounts of information, and you're always going to have to drop back to, if we descend into here, the archive. So there's configs, and then you're always going to be looking in here, the archive folder of the rolled over logs. Now this lab is new, so there's none in here, but you know what I mean? So DSA rolls over every 10 megabytes, and we'll store it right in this log archive folder here. So you'll get, massive amounts of compressed logs. They're zipped up in there. Okay, but this is the one that you're going to look at. Here's the other one that I spoke of, and it just basically is resolving links. If there's an object, a user object that has links to other things like memberships or whatever, then that's what it does. It's quite simple, but now and again it becomes useful. All right, so DSA is our log. This is our main log. You can extend this log, but it's already very comprehensive. And I find the extending doesn't work that well. It really rarely offers up much more information. If there's an error, it's going to spit it out in this log, and then it doesn't typically elaborate on that error in extended logs. You can try it if you think it might be helpful. If you have nothing left to go on, you might want to extend it. And there's an article in the knowledge base on how to do that. But everything in here. So generally, when you see common, right, you see the word common here, that's working on something. It's not speaking or reading anything from the source domain. It's not writing anything to the target. You'll start to get a feel for how these logs work. Common is just, it's getting ready based on its configuration to do stuff. And then, it'll here you'll hit source. Okay, so it might be looking at the source, right? So it's session container. This might be This looks like it might be talking to the atom at the moment, but once you get down, loads up the files. Let's just go way down here. Common, still preparing stuff. Then it'll start to look into the source. Okay, I've got my source handlers stuff. And eventually you'll start to see it where it reads out attributes and stuff. But there's a lot of chat in here. A lot of chat. Common target. But the point being, you'll look to here. Common is working on something. Target is starting to look what it's going to do on the target, and source, same thing. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm not going to overwhelm talking about everything that's going on in here because there's a lot of stuff. But we'll just know that this is where you're going to look. You're always going to ask for this log. Whenever you have anything to do with MMAD, this is the log you're going to go to. And just do a search for error. Generally, it's going to, there are some lines with the word error in it, but if you use Notepad++ or something, you're going to track on the actual errors pretty quick. Okay. And I always go one up, and I always put my shortcut, shortcut to the desktop. I always tell the users to do that too, so they can get back to it quickly. Shortcut to the desktop to my configs folder. Okay, yeah, just DLLs here. Manager. Blah, blah, blah. That's about it. x86. Okay, let's run through another migration session here just to talk about. If you have no more questions at the moment, I'll go through and just show you something on what we call import files that a lot of people use to help manage the migration of user accounts or any other classes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So you can create, when you create a session, a new session here, it's a blank slate. But if you create a session off your previous migration session, it holds all the settings of that session. So you might be redoing a session, so it speeds it up, right? So this is test user 2, right? Same thing, but you'll notice same settings, same users, everything. So then you just next it out right to the end, because you know what I mean? In the interest of time, it'll hold all those settings for you. So it keeps all the settings that we already had. So you can just go next, and finish it. Okay. All right, I'm just going to cancel that. So let's go to a new session and import file use. And all this is a notepad file. Notepad, and you're just going to create this file with column headers, and they are delimited by tabs. The reason they're delimited by the tab is because we take spaces, so we don't delimit on spaces. Okay, so let's, in the most simplest form of an import file, it's Sam account name, right? This is the simplest form. So Bill and Patrick each gets its own line, right? So on and so forth. What you do is you make sure there's no hidden spaces on these lines down here. You got to make sure that that's right there, and then delete. Make sure there's nothing on these lines under here. Okay. Now this import file will save as simple, and we'll put it on the desktop. And boom. So then we'll just say, whoops, no, not select, but import file. Oh, it's going to fail because those users aren't real, but you'll get the idea. I probably should have used real ones. So simple, there's my file. And yeah, not all directory objects were resolved successfully, so they weren't there. I can just go. Let's use Bilbo 1 and Bilbo 10. Okay. So go back. Create that import file. Bilbo 1, Bilbo 10. Save it. Import it. Didn't work. Okay, so it grabbed them. So that's an import file. That's in its most simplest form. But what if we want to change the name of these users on the way over? So what are we going to do with that? We're going to take that import file, flash it up. Here, we're going to use the tab, SAM account name, again, right? Then I just down arrow key to jump to the end, then I go tab again. So a tab right there, and I'm just going to call that Tim in the target. Arrow key down, tab it over, no spaces, and I'm going to call John. Now it jumped over for whatever reason. The tab jumped much further there, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it's a tab in between any of the columns, okay? And you can change whatever else you want to. So it's SAM account name because that's our matching. SAM account name to SAM account name. You can, this will either create or merge into an existing Tim or merge into an existing John or create it. But then if you want something else, you can add one more column. Like say, well, I also need the name to be something different. Down, tab it over. This is under the name column now, so my name, right? Etc. Tab. John name, John, maybe it's the same, whatever. Okay, so you can do this for as many attributes as you want. This is how you create an import file, because a lot of people want to change the format. You know, maybe it's first dot last, and it's going to go to last dot first, something along those lines. But they'll mess up this import file, and it'll cause trouble. So a lot of the time, you have to audit this for them. You go in and say, make sure there's no spaces at the end of anything. Back it up, and then I delete. I bring up the column like that, or the previous line. Then I enter, and then I usually check, delete, tab. So I kind of rebuild it a little bit, tab, you know, like that. It's very finicky. So if it's not right, then, you know, you get it wrong. And the other thing is, if they have a space, let's say they have a space on the beginning of this name in the target like this, and they don't see it, you know, you can't see the space. This will blow up. It won't migrate because it won't merge into your user. And it'll drive you crazy trying to figure out why, because that space is there, but you can't see it, right? So that's the other reason you have to check for it. I had one like that the other day. It took a while to find. Okay, so that's an import file. It's pretty important, used by a lot, and there's KB articles on that too. I'll just put it in here for the notes. The best one I think is 16917. I think was the article number, so you can search for that. Okay. All right. So yeah, there's an import file. That's pretty simple. That's basically it for Migration Manager. The hardest part, the tool is fairly simple to use in understanding, you know, what it's for and what it's trying to do. It's when they start asking you scenarios, questions about various states and what will happen when I do this and when I do that. That's when it becomes much more in depth and you realize just how complex this whole thing can be based on how they've configured it. Oh, the other thing we didn't go over, here's your domain pair. Your domain pair, whatever you set for properties under domain pair is the same for sync and migration, okay? So it's like a global setting for both of those things. So here I can set new delegated migration. I can set somebody, I guess, a specified number of users or whatever it is the case may be that you want to delegate that person to handle. You delete stuff, regular friend. Okay, so properties of your domain pair. The first one, this is where we set the users, right? So the credentials. And we know when I advance, like I spoke earlier, when I advance to it, I know that source credential is good because it didn't fail. It ran a test right then and there. Okay. So I set it for my target, and then I go here, it runs a test, it's good. A lot of the time they may come in here and they'll be skipping disabled accounts and expired accounts and can't figure out why they can't migrate certain things because they are either disabled or expired. That's one that trips people up quite a bit. This is for default administrators and domain users. We don't migrate those by default. Because they're built-in groups, that whole thing gets a little trickier. Okay, so we won't get too deep into that just yet. conflict resolution rules. So if you get a conflict from Active Directory and it says, no, you can't create that because I already have a user with that name, right? Then you can say, okay, here, add this suffix to it or something for that particular thing. So for source domain account, if account's expired, do something, or any one of these things by attribute. You can queue it for manual resolution, add prefix, add suffix, whatever. You can look at these things, and people don't typically use these. I've seen them once in a blue moon. It's pretty rare. Object matching. So this is a very important section. You will look at this. Whenever I go in to troubleshoot a case, the first thing I do is I come to these domain pair properties and look at what they've done for these three things, these last three things: skip objects, conflict resolution rules, and object matching, and understand how they're set up to do that, because it will explain a lot of behavior, okay? Here is the most important thing about matching target objects by. SAM account name is the only one that pre-exists on things, right? The SAM account name on a created object is there because you have to create objects in Active Directory, and it's there. But email address is never going to match, unless you pre-populate it. The same with SID history. You have to pre-populate the SID history in the target users in order for our SID value from the source to match the SID history of the target. So these two bottom things are pre-planned and pre-populated on the target in order to work, okay? This is why SAM account name is the only one that it's just automatically and always going to be there. So SAM account name is really the only true matching attribute, unless you're performing your migration some other way through email matching and SID history. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Service attributes. This is also very important. Oh, one more thing I should mention about this. This is saying, okay, match objects. So you're saying, look to the target and try to find me matches every time based on these check boxes. If you turn these off, you're turning off that ability. Now it no longer looks. It doesn't look. It just blindly tries to create things in AD. Doesn't try to merge into anything. So that's when you'll get conflicts. If it finds something, it will just, Active Directory might append its own name. It'll say, oh, I couldn't make that, so I'm just going to create another one. Or it'll tell you in some other way that, no, I just can't do that, right? Something along those lines, okay? So this tells the tool to look for those matches on the target. And if you don't want to, then just blindly create. But this is almost always on. I don't know why anybody would really turn this off. It doesn't make a lot of sense to turn it off, but I suppose there's some reason. You can also change the order of this. So say I highlight that, I can say, you know what? I don't want to check for SAM account name because I'm pre-populating email. In other words, my email account is the exact same source, the exact same on the source and the target, and I know they are because I populated my target account to have that email address. So then I can say, find it by email first, so I'm just going to put that down. So now email is the very first thing to look for, then SAM account name, then SID history, okay? But again, SAM account name is typically the first thing that's always there. So you might come in and you'll see that they've got these turned off and they only have SID history on. So they got these two off, and you'll say, well, why are you matching on SID history? Did you pre-populate every single target account with the SID value of your source users? And they'll say, well, I don't know, or I know, or something like that. And you say, oh, well, okay, that's your problem then. We don't typically change it. They have to make sure they understand why that's been configured the way it is, because this is professional services mandatory. The tool is, which means somebody qualified has to set it up before support even looks at it, typically, right? And so we don't ever change anything that's been set up wrongly, even until we understand why it's been set up wrongly, and let them know if they're going to change it, that's on them. That's not on us, you know. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to put that back. Service attributes. When we find that source, or we take a source user or any other object for that matter, we stamp, if we find a match, if we either create it or match it in something on the target, we stamp in two attributes. We find two attributes that are not in use, and if you have Exchange installed in the target, then we always use extension attribute 14 and 15. That's by default, because these are the two least used attributes that we could find. So for user objects, say, when we migrate something from the source, we stamp in 14 and 15. 14 is developer's kitchen kind of stuff. We really don't care what it is. It's just information that they use. 15 is the object GUID of the source user. So that's how you can confirm that you have a good match or a bad match. Because they may say, oh, there's something wrong. It's not matching up to my proper user or whatever. Typically, something's gone wrong with this matching. Okay, maybe they changed, it got matched from a previous migration and then they changed the name of the user or something like that. And now the matching screwed up, right? Something like that. So they will, yeah, you'll have the mismatch there. So this is what you're gonna come to that target user and say, okay, was that 14, 15 populated? Extension attribute 15, you're going to get the value out of it, which is going to be the object GUID of the source user. If it matches the source user, then you'll know you've got a proper match. If it doesn't, you'll know something went horribly wrong somewhere, and you're going to have to undo that migration session. How do we undo a migration session? We come here to the migration sessions, we right-click, and we undo it. Go to next. This will ask you which users you want to undo. I just want to do undo one, say. Right? And then the object will now be rolled back. So this will undo any bad matching or troublesome things. Sometimes it'll nail the problem for you, and other times it won't. You know, you'll have to dig deeper. Okay, so it runs through. It's a simple process. There is no undo with synchronization. If they turn that sync on and they create 1,000 objects over on the target, whether it be user objects or whatever, there's no undo. They now have to manually delete all those users, and all those records are left in the Atom database and everything. It won't consume a license through the synchronization, but they'll be left with a mess on the target that they have to deal with. And so that's another reason that migration sessions in their control should be used first and well understood. Okay. All right, so I just undid that one user, so it'll no longer be on the target. It rolled it back, and we reclaim a license. Okay, that's one of the other most powerful things, that you can undo things and get your licenses back through migration sessions. Okay. All right. So yeah, we were talking about this still, the properties, object matching, service attributes. We were looking at the user class, 14 and 15. So yeah, I stamped that object GUID in there. Again, to find, that is how I know that it's been matched up properly. If you just can't find, now you can do a search. Let's say you've got some something mismatched, and you know that your object in the source, it has been matched to something, but you don't know where, you can't find it. You could potentially search the Active Directory for the object GUID. Say, search extension attribute 15 equal to this object GUID, and search the entire directory. Something along those lines to try to find that. Now, there is another way, but it's a little more dangerous, and that is to look in the Atom itself.